There's a carton in your fridge right now that roughly two-thirds of the adult humans on this planet can't properly digest. Not a delicacy, not something exotic. Milk. Around 65% of adults worldwide lose most of their ability to break down lactose after childhood. In parts of East Asia, that figure climbs past 90%. And yet global dairy is an industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and milk sits in refrigerators on every continent on Earth. That's odd enough on its own. What makes it genuinely strange is where the milk comes from. No other adult mammal on this planet drinks milk. A kitten stops, a puppy stops, a calf stops. Milk is infant food, and every mammal alive is built to walk away from it eventually. Humans didn't walk away. We did something no other species has ever done. We kept drinking milk into adulthood, and then we started taking it from a completely different animal. So this isn't really a story about milk. It's a story about a single letter of DNA that should never have spread, a technology invented 7,000 years ago to work around a broken gut, and a catastrophe that made drinking milk a matter of survival. All of it comes down to a single enzyme and a schedule that almost every mammal on Earth follows without exception. Milk contains lactose, a sugar too large to cross the wall of your intestine intact. To use it, your body needs a tool called lactase, an enzyme that splits lactose into two smaller sugars your bloodstream can absorb. Every healthy mammal is born producing it. You were. It's the reason a newborn can live on nothing but milk for months. And then, in almost every mammal that has ever lived, the tap shuts off. Lactase production winds down after weaning. In humans, it typically begins falling somewhere between the ages of 2 and 5. This isn't a malfunction, it's a schedule. Once an animal is eating solid food, the enzyme is expensive to keep making and pointless to keep around, so the body stops making it. That schedule is why the phrase lactose intolerant is one of the most misleading labels in medicine. It isn't a condition and it isn't a deficiency. It is the factory setting for the human species and for every mammal on Earth. If you can't drink milk without regretting it, nothing went wrong with you. Your body is doing what mammal bodies have done since long before there were any people around to be inconvenienced by it. The people who can drink it are the anomaly. That anomaly has a precise address. It sits on chromosome 2 in a gene called LCT, the gene that codes for lactase. But the change that matters isn't in LCT itself. It's thousands of base pairs upstream, buried inside a neighboring gene called MCM6, in a stretch of DNA that works as a switch. In most people, that switch flips off after childhood. In some people, it doesn't. The best studied variant is cataloged as RS4988235. In practical terms, it's a single letter change, one C swapped for one T, in a piece of regulatory DNA the genome would otherwise consider unremarkable. That's the entire difference. Not a better enzyme, not a new organ, a broken-off switch. Geneticists noticed something about it early on. When researchers scanned the human genome for signatures of recent aggressive natural selection, genes that spread far too fast to be luck, lactase persistence sits near the very top of the list. It's one of the strongest signals of recent selection anywhere in human DNA. A signal that strong implies something more than mild convenience. Whatever was favoring this mutation was pushing hard, and it was pushing for a very long time. The problem is that when scientists went looking for what, the timeline fell apart. The story you would expect goes something like this. Humans domesticate cattle, people start drinking milk, and the mutation appears and spreads quickly because the milk drinkers survive better. Within a few generations, everyone in the dairy regions can handle lactose. It's a tidy story, and almost none of it survives contact with the evidence. Archaeologists can now detect milk directly. Ancient pottery absorbs fat into its walls, and those fats survive for thousands of years. Chemical analysis can separate dairy fat from meat fat with real confidence. Using that method, researchers have found dairy residues on pottery from Anatolia dating back roughly 9,000 years. In Britain, milk was being processed around 6,000 years ago. Across Neolithic Europe, the pattern holds. People were milking animals early, and they were doing it constantly. Then ancient DNA arrived and broke everything. When geneticists sequenced skeletons from those same regions in those same periods, the lactase persistence variant was almost absent. Rare. In many samples, simply not there at all. The conclusion is uncomfortable and difficult to avoid. For thousands of years, quite possibly 4,000 or more, human beings across Europe were drinking milk they couldn't digest. They weren't waiting for evolution to catch up. They were doing something else entirely. In the 1970s, an American archaeologist named Peter Bogucki was excavating Neolithic farming sites in Kujawia, in central Poland. He kept turning up fragments of pottery pierced with small holes. Nobody could say what they were for. They looked like colanders, and someone eventually floated the idea that they might be cheese strainers. But the suggestion sat there largely ignored for the better part of 30 years. Then in 2012, a team including Bogucki and the biogeochemist Richard Evershed ran those fragments through lipid residue analysis. They were looking for the chemical ghost of whatever had once passed through the holes. They found milk fat. The sherds were roughly 7,500 years old, making them some of the oldest direct evidence of cheesemaking found anywhere in the world. When milk is fermented or strained into cheese and yogurt, bacteria consume much of the lactose, and the watery whey that carries the rest is drained away. Hard-aged cheeses can end up with almost none left. The bacteria digest the sugar so your gut doesn't have to. Neolithic Europeans, then, weren't suffering through undrinkable milk. They had already engineered their way around their own biology thousands of years before their DNA changed. And that leaves an obvious hole in the story. If cheese already solved the problem, there was no pressing reason for the gene to spread at all. To see how well that workaround actually works, look at Mongolia. Dairy isn't a side dish in Mongolian food culture. It's the center of it. Herders produce dried curd, fermented mare's milk, milk teas, cheeses and yogurts, and dairy has anchored life on the steppe for thousands of years. And the rate of lactase persistence in the Mongolian population is extremely low, on the order of a few percent. By the logic of the clean story, that should be impossible. A population living on dairy should be saturated with the mutation. Research led by Christina Wariner has traced dairy consumption on the steppe back thousands of years. Her team works with milk proteins preserved inside the hardened dental plaque of ancient skeletons, people who genetically mostly couldn't digest lactose. They manage it the same way Neolithic Poland did, by fermenting almost everything they drink and letting the bacteria do the labor for them. The argument is now in an awkward place. Cheese works, fermentation works, and entire civilizations have run on dairy for millennia without ever needing the gene at all. The European story starts to look genuinely bizarre in that light. The mutation didn't spread because it was the only solution available. It spread despite a perfectly good solution already existing, one that people were clearly using. Something else was driving it. In 2022, a very large study went looking for what? The study assembled two enormous datasets, fat residues from roughly 7,000 pottery fragments across Europe and the Near East, and ancient DNA from more than 1,000 prehistoric individuals. The team included Richard Evershed, the geneticist Mark Thomas, and the epidemiologist George Davy Smith, and the results were published in Nature. They tested the obvious idea first. If milk drove the mutation, the places and periods with the most milk should show the most lactase persistence. They found almost no relationship. Milk use rose and fell across thousands of years. The gene simply didn't follow it. What did track with the gene, according to their analysis, were markers of crisis, famine and infectious disease, settlement collapse, population crashes. Their proposed explanation turns the entire story inside out. If you're healthy and you drink milk you can't digest, the result is discomfort, cramping, bloating, and unpleasant afternoon. If you're starving or already sick with a diarrheal infection, the result isn't discomfort. Undigested lactose pulls water into the gut. In a body that's already dehydrated and already malnourished, that can be the thing that kills you. So the mutation may not have spread because milk was nourishing. It may have spread because milk was the last food left. And if that's right, then the map of who can drink milk today isn't a map of diet at all. It's a casualty record. In Denmark, Sweden, Ireland, and the Netherlands, Lactase persistence runs above 90%. Move south and it falls away. Around the Mediterranean, it sits in the middle. Across most of East Asia, it collapses to a few percent. And in some populations, it's close to zero. That gradient isn't a record of who like milk. Plenty of low persistence populations have long and sophisticated dairy traditions. It's a record of where the pressure was hardest, where crop failure, crowding, disease, and hunger arrived often enough and hard enough that one thing started to matter: whether your gut could handle raw milk. That was the difference between a family that made it through the winter and a family that didn't. Which means something quietly strange about the carton in your fridge. Whether or not you can drink it isn't really a fact about your digestion. It is a fact about your ancestors and what they lived through. And Europe wasn't the only place this happened. On another continent, evolution ran the whole experiment a second time. In 2007, the geneticist Sarah Tishkoff and her colleagues published a study of East African pastoralist communities, peoples in Kenya, Tanzania, and Sudan, whose lives have revolved around cattle for thousands of years. Many of them digest milk perfectly well as adults, so Tishkoff's team went looking for the familiar European variant. It wasn't there. Instead, they found different mutations entirely, sitting at different positions within the same regulatory stretch of DNA. Different letters, different locations. Identical result: a lactase switch that refuses to turn off. This is convergent evolution, and it's one of the cleanest examples of it anywhere in our own species. Two populations, thousands of kilometers apart, with no shared ancestry for the trait, facing the same problem, and arriving at the same solution by completely separate genetic routes. Evolution ran the experiment twice, on two continents, and got the same answer both times. That tells you something that matters. This wasn't a fluke. Whatever advantage adult milk digestion delivered, it was strong enough and consistent enough that natural selection found its way there more than once, independently, under its own power. That brings us back to where we started, and to the real question underneath all of this. What was so valuable about a cow that it was worth rewriting a genome for? So, why do we drink cow milk if most adults can't digest it? Because milk was never really about the milk. A cow, a goat, a sheep, these animals do something no human being can do. They walk into a field of grass, a substance with precisely zero nutritional value to you, and convert it into protein, fat, and calories your body can use. Grass into food, every single day, and that's the part that changes everything. A cow you slaughter feeds a family once. A cow you milk feeds that family every morning for years and produces another cow. That is not a meal. That is an insurance policy against starvation. A food supply that regenerates itself on land that grows nothing else you could eat. Every trick in this entire story is the same equation, solved from a different direction. Cheese and fermentation were the cultural answer. Lactase persistence was the biological one. Both exist for one reason: to unlock calories otherwise locked inside an animal you couldn't afford to kill. We did not drink milk because we could digest it. We drank it because we could not afford not to. And eventually, in some of us, the body caught up. Today, all of that history has left us somewhere fairly absurd. The global dairy industry now produces on the order of 900 million tons of milk every year, for a species in which the clear majority of adults can't fully digest the primary sugar it contains. So we built a second industry to patch the first one. Lactose-free milk is treated with added lactase, the very enzyme your ancestors' bodies switched off, which breaks the sugar apart before it ever reaches you. You can buy that enzyme in tablet form and swallow it before dinner. Think about what that actually is. It's a pill that temporarily gives you a mutation you didn't inherit. And there is one last thing worth noticing, sitting in the language itself. We call it lactose intolerance. Intolerance. A word built for a failure, a sensitivity, something gone wrong. But it describes the global majority. It describes the ancestral human condition. It gets framed as a disorder rather than a default for one reason. The medical vocabulary was largely written by and for the populations who happen to carry the mutation. We name the normal state after the exception. So open the fridge again, That carton has 10,000 years standing behind it. Cattle domesticated in the Near East. Pots with holes punched through them in a Polish river valley 7,500 years ago. Herders on the Mongolian steppe fermenting what their bodies couldn't break down. Skeletons across Europe carrying, or not carrying, one substituted letter. Famines that killed the people who couldn't hold the water in. And then a supermarket shelf and a decision you make without thinking about any of it. If you can drink that glass without consequence, you're carrying a mutation that survived a catastrophe. Somewhere upstream of you in a bad winter, in a collapsing village, that broken off switch was the reason a line of people continued instead of ending. And if you can't drink it, if a glass of milk still ruins your evening, then understand what you actually are. You are not defective. You are the original. Your body is doing precisely what a mammal body is supposed to do, on the schedule it has always kept. The rest of us are the mutants. If you want to keep seeing the hidden machinery behind things this ordinary, subscribe. Because next we're going somewhere just as strange, and it's already sitting in your kitchen.